Welcome back to the channel. Grab a coffee, pull up a chair, and let's have a brutally honest, entirely unfiltered conversation today. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to completely forget everything you just heard on your television screen this morning. Every single time you turn on the news right now, some politician is standing at a podium flashing a massive, heavily manicured smile, bragging about low unemployment and a booming economy. If you tune into traditional financial media, they will point to the green ticker tape running across the bottom of the screen and tell you that everything is fundamentally pristine. On the surface, things look great. We are told we have low unemployment and a high stock market. But I am going to let you in on a massive, uncomfortable secret today. Underneath that shiny surface, there is a massive crisis brewing that the media is completely ignoring. The mainstream media is absolutely brilliant at one specific thing: misdirection. They love to tell the viewer that the obvious threat, like whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office or the latest flashy AI bubble, is the real danger. They will spend 24 hours a day forcing you to look at political circuses and tech manias, forcing you to keep watching to discover the supposed threat, all while completely ignoring the boring, highly complex, and deadly real threat that is quietly draining your bank account. Let me give you a sarcastic analogy to put this into perspective. If our current U.S. economy were a person, it wouldn't be a responsible adult. It would be exactly like a guy going through a massive midlife crisis. Picture a guy who is maxing out 5 different credit cards just to buy a shiny red sports car he absolutely cannot afford, completely ignoring the fact that his mortgage is 3 months past due, all just to keep up appearances for the neighbors. Or, if this economy were a Tinder date, it would be the guy who calls himself a visionary tech entrepreneur, but really is just selling solar panels door to door. It is a beautifully crafted, desperate illusion. Underneath the headline numbers they feed you on CNBC, the government is using a statistical illusion to hide the fact that the middle class is quietly collapsing into part-time jobs and credit card debt. The global financial system is not a pristine science. It is an absurd, completely debt-fueled casino. And today, I am going to prove to you exactly how the government is faking the economy, exposing the exact mathematical tricks they use to manipulate your reality. Let's dive in. To understand how the government is getting away with this massive statistical illusion today, we cannot just look at the present. We have to hit the rewind button, zoom out, and look at the historical context to explain exactly how we got here. Because the central bankers didn't just wake up yesterday and decide to start manipulating economic reality out of thin air. This is a highly calculated playbook developed over decades of systemic financial failures. First, let's dive into Japan's lost decades in the 1990s to explain global liquidity. Back in the 1980s, Japan experienced an astronomical asset bubble fueled entirely by speculative mania and cheap credit. Real estate and stock prices reached completely psychotic valuations, but eventually, as all debt-fueled bubbles do, it violently collapsed. Instead of letting the market naturally correct itself and clear out the toxic, bad debt, the Bank of Japan stepped in and intervened in unprecedented ways. They slashed interest rates to zero and pumped infinite liquidity into the system to artificially prop up asset prices. This led to years and years of economic stagnation. It created a zombie economy. But more importantly, it taught global central banks a very dangerous lesson. You can paper over a collapsing economy with infinite liquidity, even if it destroys the actual growth of the middle class in the process. We can see this exact same hubris if we look at the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Back then, institutional investors were completely obsessed with internet companies. The mainstream narrative was that the internet was a new paradigm. You could buy a company with zero revenue, zero profits, just because it had .com at the end of its name, and you held it forever, regardless of how absurd its valuation became. Sound familiar? It is the exact same delusion driving today's tech markets. When the .com bubble popped, valuations got completely crushed, trillions of dollars evaporated, and the everyday retail investor was left holding the bag. But the real turning point, the moment the system officially broke, and the statistical illusions became a permanent fixture, was the 2008 financial crisis. It introduced private credit. You remember 2008. The entire global economy almost evaporated overnight because Wall Street was packaging highly toxic, garbage mortgages into AAA-rated investments. When the house of cards collapsed, The government realized they could never allow a natural clearing recession to happen again. The political cost of a collapsing stock market was simply too high. So what happened in the ashes of 2008? The traditional public banks were suddenly hit with heavier regulations, so they pulled back on lending. But the demand for debt didn't disappear. Instead, we saw the explosive rise of private credit. The real money moved entirely out of the public eye and into the shadows, into massive, unregulated loans negotiated entirely behind closed doors. Post-2008, the government and central banks began heavily utilizing incredibly complex, boring financial mechanisms like the yen carry trade, yield curve control, private credit, and government deficits to artificially stimulate the economy. They realized as long as they could manipulate the headline data to make it look like the economy was growing, the average citizen wouldn't notice that their actual purchasing power was being quietly stolen by inflation. The goal was no longer real economic prosperity. The goal was simply to maintain the statistical illusion of it. So, how exactly does this illusion work on a day-to-day basis? How do they fake the numbers while you are struggling to pay for basic groceries? To break down the complex financial concept using simple buckets or personas, let's use a fictional character. Let's meet Dave. Dave is a hardworking, everyday retail investor. Dave wakes up every morning, pours his coffee, turns on the morning news, and tries his absolute best to play by the rules. Dave hears the politicians on his TV aggressively bragging about how strong the job market is, claiming that the economy added hundreds of thousands of jobs last month. But Dave's lived reality is an absolute nightmare. Dave used to have a solid, middle-class, full-time job with benefits, health care, and a 401k match. But a year ago, his company decided to restructure to appease their private equity overlords, and Dave lost his full-time position. This is where the massive statistical illusion comes into play. It highlights how full-time jobs are disappearing in favor of multiple part-time gigs. To make ends meet and keep his family off the streets, Dave is now forced into the gig economy. He's driving for a rideshare company 4 mornings a week, delivering groceries on the weekends, and working part-time at a local hardware store. Dave is physically and mentally exhausted. He's working 70 hours a week across 3 different gigs and barely making a fraction of what he used to make at his one full-time job. When the government releases its official jobs report, they absolutely do not count Dave as a middle-class casualty. No, the government looks at Dave's completely miserable situation and throws a massive celebration. Because Dave is working 3 part-time gigs, the government's highly flawed data logs that as 3 separate, brand-new jobs created. Let that sink in. The jobs that actually build a stable middle-class life are evaporating, entirely replaced by a dystopian hustle culture. But the headline unemployment number looks absolutely pristine because people like Dave are forced to work 3 jobs just to survive. The media points to the low unemployment rate and says the economy is booming, while underneath the middle class is quietly collapsing. And it gets much, much worse. Let's look at how Dave is actually paying for his life. Because Dave's income has completely cratered, but the price of his rent, groceries, and insurance has skyrocketed due to inflation, Dave has a massive gap in his budget. How does he fill that gap? Debt. Consumers are secretly funding their daily survival with record-high 21% interest credit cards. Dave isn't taking on debt to buy a luxury boat or go on a European vacation. Dave is desperately maxing out a 21% interest credit card just to buy eggs, milk, and keep the electricity turned on. But how does the government report this terrifying reality? They look at the GDP, the gross domestic product. The GDP is designed to measure consumer spending. So when Dave desperately swipes his credit card at the grocery store, going further into crippling, unpayable debt just to feed his kids, the government logs that exact transaction as robust consumer spending. The politicians stand at the podium and say, "Look at how confident the American consumer is. Spending is up." It is a complete and utter farce. Spending isn't up because people are prosperous. Spending is up because people are drowning, and the cost of basic survival has literally doubled. This is the absolute absurdity of the debt-fueled casino we live in. We can divide this debt into simple buckets: good, bad, and ugly. The elite's debt is good because they use it as leverage to buy assets. Dave's 21% credit card debt is the ugly. While Dave is drowning just to eat, you have the exact inverse happening on Wall Street. Because in the exact same economy where Dave is suffocating, you have these stereotypical finance bros pacing around their high-rise offices in Patagonia vests, aggressively packing Zyn pouches into their upper lips, and making millions off the exact private credit facilities that are currently trapping Dave. And on the retail side, it's just as bleak. You have entire communities of Discord degenerates and zero DTE options traders who lose their life savings on meme coins. They have completely given up on the traditional middle-class dream, so they turn to the casino. The elites and the speculators are surfing on a massive ocean of government-printed liquidity, while the everyday retail investor is completely left behind, gaslit by a media apparatus that tells them the economy has never been better. All right, we have officially reached the climax of this entire charade. We have established that Dave is drowning in multiple part-time gigs and 21% interest credit card debt, all while the mainstream media claims the macroeconomic picture is perfect. Why does this massive, glaring disconnect keep happening? Why does the official data fail to match your actual lived reality? This brings us to the uncomfortable truth. This is the systemic flaw that nobody on traditional financial media will ever admit to you. There is a deep, fundamental flaw in how modern governments track and operate the economy, and this video uses a brilliant concept called the McNamara fallacy to explain exactly how they fake the numbers. For those who don't know, the McNamara fallacy is named after Robert McNamara, the U.S. Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War. McNamara was obsessed with numbers and data. During the war, he decided that the only way to measure success was through a completely quantifiable metric, the enemy body count. He ignored everything else: the morale of the troops, the complex political reality on the ground, the suffering of the civilians, because those things couldn't easily be put into a spreadsheet. By focusing exclusively on the one metric he could track, he created a deeply distorted, fake reality that led to absolute catastrophe. The fallacy states that making decisions based only on quantitative metrics, while entirely ignoring all qualitative human factors, guarantees failure. Now, I want you to apply the McNamara fallacy directly to the United States economy. For decades, the government and central bankers have been completely obsessed with a handful of quantitative metrics: the raw number of jobs added, and the gross domestic product. They sit in their offices in Washington and Wall Street, completely insulated from the real world, tracking these numbers on a spreadsheet. They measure the quantity of jobs created, but they deliberately ignore the quality of those jobs. To them, a high-paying, full-time manufacturing career with a pension is statistically identical to a 15-hour-a-week gig driving for Uber. They completely ignore the unquantifiable human reality, the stress, the lack of health care, the absolute exhaustion of the middle class. Because Dave's misery can't be easily measured, they pretend it doesn't exist. They just log his 3 gig economy side hustles as a massive win for the spreadsheet. The same goes for the GDP. They measure the raw volume of dollars moving through the economy, but they ignore how those dollars got there. They don't care if you were taking on massive, crippling debt at 21% interest rates just to afford your basic utility bills and groceries. They don't care that your credit cards are completely maxed out, because every single time you swipe that card in pure desperation, the GDP goes up. They look at the spreadsheet and declare victory, completely abandoning the everyday retail investor. This is exactly why official economic metrics no longer reflect the lived reality of everyday Americans. It is a highly calculated statistical illusion designed to protect the people at the absolute top. By falling into the McNamara fallacy, or actively using it to their advantage, they can look at a dying middle class and confidently tell the cameras that everything is fine. The system is fundamentally broken, and you just have to accept it. The people running the show, the massive shadow funds, the private credit managers, the central bankers, they know exactly what they are doing. They are actively manipulating these incredibly complex financial mechanisms, like government deficits and yield curve control, to ensure the liquidity never ever stops flowing to the top. They watch the middle class quietly collapse. They watch you struggle with 21% interest rates, and they use that exact same consumer debt to package into new financial instruments to trade among themselves. They have literally turned your financial suffering into a measurable, targetable asset class. The government isn't failing to measure the economy, they are actively faking it. So where does that actually leave us? It leads us to conclude that the system is rigged and we are headed for severe, undeniable turbulence. The entire global economy is hurtling forward, fueled by record government deficits, speculative tech manias, and a middle class that is entirely taped together by credit cards and side hustles. We are operating in a highly toxic environment where the booming economy is nothing more than a statistical mirage. It is a trick of the light engineered to keep you participating in a casino that is mathematically rigged against you from the very start. I want you to really think about this, because understanding the McNamara fallacy and this statistical illusion changes absolutely everything about how you should view the nightly news, your personal investments, and your family's financial future. I want to explicitly ask the audience a thought-provoking question to drive comments, and I want you to head down to the comment section right now and give me your unfiltered opinion. Do you think this is a permanent shift in how markets work? Or do you think this massive 21% interest credit card bubble is eventually going to snap, forcing the entire system to collapse back into reality? Are we permanently trapped in this fake economy where part-time gigs replace careers? Or is reality finally going to catch up with the headline numbers? Let me know what you think down below. I read every single comment, and I genuinely want to know if you guys are seeing this exact same middle-class collapse in your own cities and towns. And listen, if you appreciate this kind of deep-dive, no BS breakdown, and if you are tired of the superficial, sugar-coated garbage that traditional financial media feeds you every single day, hit that subscribe button right now. Traditional media won't touch these topics because it completely ruins the narrative they are highly paid to sell you. They're paid to keep you looking at the flashy AI bubbles and the political circus, while the boring, deadly reality of private credit and yield curve control drains your bank account. We are going to keep acting as an authentic truth teller who is shining a light on the rigged nature of Wall Street and the economy, deliberately contrasting ourselves against traditional financial media like CNBC. We will keep exposing the brilliant scams, acting as a watchdog against crypto projects, meme coins, and predatory trading firms, and breaking down the incredibly complex mechanics that actually drive your reality. Thanks for being here. Stay sharp, protect your capital, question absolutely every single headline the media tells you, and I'll see you in the next one.